The dense, humid air of the Louisiana swamps clung to everything, a living shroud that muffled sound and blurred the edges of reality. It was here, in the labyrinthine waterways of Bayou Lafourche, that Tom Hargrove and his 12-year-old son, Ethan, set out on a crisp November morning 2 years ago, their aluminum John boat loaded with decoys, shotguns, and the kind of quiet anticipation that only a father-son hunting trip could foster. Tom, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a weathered face and a penchant for storytelling, had been taking Ethan duck hunting since the boy could hold a fishing rod. This trip was meant to be no different, a ritual of muddy boots, thermos coffee, and the sharp crack of dawn breaking over the cypress trees. Ethan, with his mop of auburn hair and eyes that mirrored his father's stubborn spark, had been thrilled, clutching his new camouflage jacket as they shoved off from the rickety dock near their small-town home in Thibodaux. The bayou was their playground, its twisting channels and hidden sloughs as familiar to them as their own backyard, yet it held secrets even locals feared to probe. That morning, they'd waved to Old Man Boudreau, who ran the bait shop, and warned them about a storm brewing south of the Gulf. Tom had laughed it off, his deep voice carrying over the water. "We've weathered worse, Boudreau. Ain't no rain gonna scare us off a good hunt." Ethan had echoed his father's grin, his small frame puffed with pride at being included in the defiance. They motored into the fog, the hum of their outboard engine fading into the swamp's eerie silence, and that was the last anyone saw of them. The town of Thibodaux buzzed with worry by evening when Tom's wife, Clara, called the sheriff. The storm Boudreau had warned about rolled in faster than expected, a squall that turned the sky black and churned the bayou into a frothing maze. Search parties scoured the swamps for days, then weeks, their boats slicing through murky waters, their shouts swallowed by the endless curtain of Spanish moss. Volunteers combed every slough, every gator-infested bend, but found nothing, no boat, no gear, no trace of the Hargroves. The sheriff's department dragged the deeper channels, divers probed the muddy bottoms, and helicopters buzzed overhead, their spotlights piercing the night. Clara, a schoolteacher with a quiet strength, refused to leave the dock for the first month, her eyes scanning the horizon as if sheer will could summon her husband and son back. Whispers spread through Thibodaux. Some said the bayou had claimed them, as it had others over the years. Others muttered about foul play, pointing fingers at drifters or poachers known to haunt the swamps. The Hargroves' disappearance became a wound in the community, a mystery that haunted church pews and barroom conversations. Clara clung to hope, pinning missing posters to every utility pole, her hands trembling as she stapled Ethan's smiling face next to Tom's grizzled one. The seasons turned, and the search dwindled to a formality, the case filed away as a tragic accident. Yet the bayou kept its secrets, its dark waters reflecting nothing but the weight of unanswered questions. 2 years later, the town had settled into an uneasy acceptance, though Clara still walked the docks at dawn, her eyes hollow but unyielding. The swamps, indifferent to human grief, continued their slow, eternal churn, cypress knees poking through the water like ancient sentinels, alligators gliding silently past. It was a diver named Marcus Tate, a wiry man hired to clear debris from a clogged channel, who stumbled into the mystery's next chapter. Marcus, a transplant from New Orleans with a knack for navigating the bayou's depths, was used to pulling up junk, rusted crab traps, tangled fishing nets, even the occasional sunken pirogue. That morning, under a sky heavy with clouds, he dove into a particularly murky stretch near a bend locals called Dead Man's Turn. The water was thick with silt, visibility near zero, but Marcus's gloved hands felt something unnatural in the mud, a hard, metallic edge. He tugged, then surfaced, calling for his partner to bring the winch. What they hauled up wasn't just debris. It was the Hargroves' John boat, its hull crumpled and encrusted with algae, the once shiny aluminum now a ghostly relic. Inside, wedged beneath a warped seat, was a small, sealed metal box, its surface etched with scratches, but intact. Marcus's heart thudded as he pried it open, revealing a waterlogged journal, its pages bloated but legible, and a single, chilling photograph. Tom and Ethan, smiling, standing in front of a cypress tree twisted into an unnatural shape, one that no one in Thibodaux had ever seen. The journal's first entry, in Tom's unmistakable scrawl, read, "Day 1. Something's wrong out here. The bayou ain't what it seems." The discovery sent ripples through Thibodaux, reigniting the mystery that had never fully settled. Clara, summoned to the sheriff's office, clutched the journal like a lifeline, her fingers tracing Tom's words as tears blurred her vision. The photograph, though faded, showed Ethan's gap-toothed grin, his arms slung around his father's waist, the strange cypress looming behind them like a skeletal hand reaching from the earth. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Landry, who'd known Tom since high school, reopened the case, though his deputies muttered about the futility of chasing ghosts. Marcus, shaken by what he'd found, described the boat's condition to anyone who'd listen. The hull wasn't just damaged, it looked crushed, as if something massive had gripped it. The journal's entries, though smeared in places, painted a fragmented picture of the Hargroves' final days. Tom wrote of strange noises at night, lights flickering in the distance, and a sense of being watched. One entry mentioned a man in the reeds, a figure Ethan swore he saw, though Tom dismissed it as the boy's imagination. The deeper Marcus read, the more the bayou seemed less a place and more a living entity, one that had swallowed the Hargroves whole. Clara, refusing to let the journal sit in an evidence locker, began transcribing it, her nights consumed by Tom's words, searching for clues to where they'd gone. The photograph's twisted cypress became her obsession, a landmark no local could place, though some swore it resembled tales of a cursed patch deep in the swamp, a place avoided even by the boldest trappers. The town's revival of the Hargrove mystery brought outsiders, reporters, amateur sleuths, even a paranormal investigator from Baton Rouge who claimed the bayou was a thin place where the veil between worlds frayed. Clara ignored the noise, her focus on the journal and the photograph, which she carried everywhere, tucked against her heart. Marcus, unable to shake the image of that crushed boat, volunteered to guide a new search, though he admitted the bayou's depths were a maze even he couldn't fully map. The sheriff organized a small team, equipped with sonar and divers, to probe Dead Man's Turn, but the swamp seemed to resist them, its current shifting, its fog thickening as if to guard its secrets. Clara, though frail from 2 years of grief, joined the searches when she could, her presence a quiet force that kept the team moving. The journal's final entries grew frantic, Tom's handwriting shaky. Ethan scared. Says the man in the reeds is closer. I don't know what's real anymore. The last page was a single sentence. If we don't make it, find the tree. Clara's dreams were haunted by that tree, its gnarled branches twisting into her sleep, whispering questions she couldn't answer. As the first paragraph of their story closed, the bayou held its breath, its dark heart pulsing with the weight of what Marcus had found, and what still lay hidden in its depths. Clara Hargrove's world had shrunk to the size of a journal and a faded photograph, each page and pixel a tether to the husband and son she refused to believe were gone. The discovery of the John boat in the murky depths of Dead Man's Turn had cracked open Thibodeau's fragile calm, stirring a tempest of speculation that rivaled the storm that swallowed Tom and Ethan 2 years prior. Clara spent her days in the small living room of their shotgun house, the journal spread across the coffee table, its waterlogged pages carefully dried and transcribed into a notebook that never left her side. She read Tom's words until they blurred into her own thoughts, his steady handwriting a lifeline to the man who'd promised to come back from every hunt. The photograph, now framed and propped beside her bed, showed Tom and Ethan standing before the twisted cypress, its branches curling like claws against a sky too gray for a November morning. Clara traced the tree's outline with her finger, willing it to reveal its location, but the bayou was vast, its secrets buried in channels that shifted with every tide. She'd taken to visiting the library, poring over old maps and folklore, searching for any mention of a tree like the one in the photo. The librarian, Miss Evangeline, a wiry woman with a penchant for local history, pointed her to tales of a place called L'Ombre du Bayou, the shadow of the bayou, a patch of swamp said to be cursed, where compasses spun wildly and hunters never returned. Clara's heart raced at the mention, but the maps showed no such place, and even the old trappers at Boudreaux's bait shop shook their heads, dismissing it as a ghost story. Yet the journal's cryptic entries, the man in the reeds, lights in the fog, the bayou's watching, nodded her, suggesting Tom and Ethan had stumbled into something beyond the natural. The town, meanwhile, buzzed with a mix of sympathy and morbid curiosity. The sheriff's office, under pressure from Clara and a renewed media frenzy, organized a second wave of searches, this time with Marcus Tate as the lead diver. Marcus, still haunted by the crushed hull of the John boat, had become an unwilling figurehead in the mystery, his name whispered in diners and church pews as the man who'd pulled the Hargroves ghost from the swamp. He'd sit at the bar of Cajun Jack's, nursing a beer, recounting the dive to anyone who asked. The boat wasn't just sunk, it was mangled, its aluminum sides buckled as if squeezed by a giant's fist. He'd felt something off in the water that day, a current that tugged at him like a warning, and the memory of that sealed metal box, containing the journal and photograph, kept him up at night. The sheriff, Landry, leaned on Marcus for details, hoping the diver's expertise could pinpoint where the boat had drifted from, but the bayou's currents were a riddle, carrying debris miles from where it sank. Landry's team used sonar to map Dead Man's Turn, but the equipment faltered in the swamp's murky depths, screens flickering with static that technicians blamed on mineral deposits. Clara joined these searches when her teaching schedule allowed, her slight frame bundled in a borrowed jacket, her eyes scanning the water for any sign of the twisted cypress. The volunteers, a mix of locals and thrill-seekers drawn by news reports, whispered about the journal's contents, leaked by a deputy with a loose tongue. Tom's mentions of the man in the reeds sparked wild theories. Some said it was a hermit living deep in the swamp, others a spirit from Cajun folklore, like the Rougarou, a beast said to stalk the bayou's edges. Clara dismissed the supernatural talk, her focus on the tangible. The tree, the boat, the truth. Marcus, though no believer in ghosts, couldn't shake the unease that clung to him after the dive. He'd grown up in New Orleans, where the line between myth and reality blurred, but the bayou felt different. Older, hungrier. He agreed to lead Clara and a small team to probe deeper into the swamp, beyond Dead Man's Turn, where the channels narrowed and the cypress grew so thick they blocked the sun. The group included Landry, a deputy named Claire who'd known Ethan from Sunday school, and a grizzled trapper named Remy, who claimed to know every slough in Lafourche Parish. They set out at dawn, their boats slicing through fog so dense it felt like breathing cotton. Clara clutched the photograph, her eyes darting to every tree, searching for the one that matched. Remy, steering the lead boat, muttered about the swamp's tricks, how it could turn you around till you forget your own name. His stories of lost hunters and strange lights echoed Tom's journal, making Clara's skin prickle. The team found nothing that first day, nor the next, but on the third, Marcus's sonar pinged something large beneath a narrow channel flanked by cypress knees. He dove, his flashlight cutting through the silt, and surfaced with a child's boot. Ethan's, Clara confirmed, her voice breaking as she recognized the mark from a soccer game. The boot was eerily preserved, as if it had been dropped days ago, not years. The find spurred the team onward, but the swamp seemed to push back, its current shifting, branches snagging their boats. Clara, undeterred, pressed Marcus to keep diving, her desperation a quiet force that silenced doubters. The journal became Clara's map, its entries a breadcrumb trail through Tom's final days. She read them aloud to the team at night, her voice steady despite the grief that threatened to crack it. Tom wrote of a storm that trapped them in a slough, their radio dead, their compass spinning uselessly. He described Ethan's fear, how the boy clung to him as strange noises, low, guttural hums, echoed through the fog. The man in the reeds appeared in multiple entries, always at dusk, a shadow Ethan swore moved closer each night. Tom, ever the skeptic, chalked it up to exhaustion, but his later entries grew paranoid. He's not a man. Don't know what he is. Ethan says he hears him whispering. Clara's dreams twisted these words into nightmares, the reeds parting to reveal a faceless figure watching her. She shared the entries with Marcus, who admitted to seeing odd shapes in the water during his dives, shadows that vanished when he turned. Remy, spitting tobacco into the fire, told of an old Cajun tale about a spirit called Leveilleur, the Watcher, who lured hunters into the swamp's heart, never to return. Clara, though, clung to logic, convinced the tree in the photograph was the key. She sketched it from memory, showing it to every trapper and fisherman in Thibodeau, but none recognized it. One old woman, a treader who claimed to heal with herbs, took one look at Clara's sketch and crossed herself, muttering about l'ombre du bayou. That tree ain't natural, she said. It grows where the devil walks. As the searches stretched into weeks, Clara's resolve hardened, though her body weakened. She'd lost weight, her cheeks hollow, her hands trembling from lack of sleep. The town rallied around her, bringing casseroles and prayers, but the media's interest waned, the story overshadowed by newer tragedies. Marcus, now invested beyond his paycheck, felt the swamp's pull, its silence louder than any city noise he'd known. On a final dive before winter rains made the channels impassable, he found a second object near where the boot had been, a rusted hunting knife, its handle carved with Tom's initials. Clara wept when she saw it, remembering how Tom had taught Ethan to clean fish with it. The knife, like the boot, was too well preserved, its blade still sharp despite 2 years underwater. Marcus began to wonder if the bayou was toying with them, offering clues only to draw them deeper. The team's last trip before the rains brought them to a slough so narrow their boats barely fit, the cypress trees closing in like a cage. Clara, scanning the banks, froze. A tree, gnarled and twisted, matched the photograph's silhouette. She shouted for the boats to stop, her heart pounding as she stepped onto the muddy bank, the journal clutched to her chest. The tree loomed, its roots pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, and for a moment, Clara swore she heard Ethan's voice, faint, calling her name. The team stared, silent, as the fog thickened, the bayou whispering secrets it wasn't ready to share. The twisted cypress stood like a sentinel in the suffocating fog of the bayou, its gnarled branches curling toward the sky as if clawing at the heavens. Clara Hargrove, her boots sinking into the muddy bank, felt her pulse hammer in her throat as she stared at the tree from the photograph, the one that had haunted her dreams since Marcus Tate pulled the journal and picture from the wrecked John boat. The air around it was heavier, thick with a stillness that made the swamp's usual chorus of frogs and crickets fall silent. Clara's team, Marcus, Sheriff Landry, Deputy Claire, and the trapper Remy, stood behind her, their faces taut with a mix of awe and unease. The tree matched the photograph exactly, its unnatural shape defying the orderly chaos of the bayou's cypress groves. Clara clutched Tom's journal, its pages worn from her constant handling, and whispered Ethan's name, half expecting an answer from the fog. The moment felt like a hinge in time, the swamp holding its breath as if it knew they'd found its secret heart. Remy, his weathered hands gripping the boat's edge, muttered a prayer in Cajun French, his eyes darting to the reeds that swayed without wind. Marcus, ever practical, scanned the water for clues, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that the bayou was watching them, its dark currents alive with intent. Clara stepped closer to the tree, her fingers brushing its bark, which felt cold and slick, almost pulsing under her touch. She didn't care if the others thought her mad. She'd found the landmark Tom and Ethan had stood before, and it was her only path to them. The team set up a makeshift camp on the narrow bank, their boats tethered to cypress knees that jutted like bones from the water. Landry, his sheriff's badge glinting dully in the filtered light, organized a perimeter search, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. The swamp had a way of swallowing certainty, and this slough, uncharted even on Remy's mental map, felt like a place the world had forgotten. Marcus dove into the channel beside the tree, his flashlight cutting through the silt to reveal a bottom littered with strange debris, a rusted duck call, a shredded camouflage cap, and, chillingly, a child's toy, a small plastic duck Ethan used to carry in his pocket. Clara, holding the toy, felt her knees buckle, the weight of 2 years' grief crashing into the hope that had kept her alive. The journal's entries, which she recited like a mantra, spoke of this place. Day 3. Found a tree that don't belong. Ethan says it's alive. I laughed, but now I'm not sure. Tom's words, once skeptical, grew frantic in later entries, describing shadows that moved against the current and a low hum that vibrated in their bones. Clara, standing beneath the tree, felt that hum now, a faint tremor in the air that made her teeth ache. She begged Marcus to keep searching, her voice raw, and he nodded, though his eyes held a wariness he hadn't shown before. The swamp, he said, wasn't just hiding things, it was guarding them. As night fell, the team's campfire cast flickering shadows on the cypress, its twisted form seeming to shift in the light. Remy told stories of L'Ombre du Bayou, the cursed patch where the veil between worlds thinned, where hunters vanished and boats drifted back empty. He spoke of Levallier, the Watcher, a figure from Cajun lore said to lure men into the swamp's depths with promises of riches or safety, only to trap them forever. Claire, the deputy, scoffed, her practical nature clashing with Remy's superstitions, but even she flinched when a branch snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Clara, too consumed by the journal to sleep, read by flashlight, piecing together Tom's final days. He wrote of a storm that pinned them in the slough, their boat caught in a tangle of roots. Ethan, scared but brave, had spotted the man in the reeds, again, describing him as tall, thin, with eyes that glowed like marsh gas. Tom's entries grew disjointed. Can't trust my eyes. Ethan hears him calling. Says he knows my name. Clara's heart sank at the thought of her son, alone and terrified, seeing something his father couldn't explain. She looked up at the tree, its branches now blending into the night, and wondered if it was more than a landmark, if it was a gate, a trap, or something alive. Marcus's dives the next day yielded more relics. A fragment of Tom's shotgun, its barrel bent impossibly, and a torn piece of Ethan's jacket, the camouflage pattern unmistakable. Each find was a knife to Clara's heart, proof that her family had been here, but no closer to where they were now. The team's sonar, already unreliable, began picking up anomalies, large, shifting shapes beneath the water that vanished when Marcus dove to investigate. He surfaced once, pale and shaken, describing a current that tried to pull him deeper, as if the bayou itself wanted him to stay. Remy, growing agitated, insisted they leave, warning that the swamp don't let go once it's got you. But Clara refused, her voice steel. I'm not leaving without them. She began exploring the bank, searching for signs, a footprint, a carving, anything. Near the tree's roots, she found a small pile of stones, arranged in a circle, too deliberate to be natural. Inside was a single duck feather, its quill stained with something dark. Clara's breath caught. She'd seen Ethan collect such feathers on their hunts, tucking them into his pocket like treasures. She called the team over, and Landry bagged the feather as evidence, though his face said he doubted it meant anything. Marcus, however, noticed scratches on the tree's bark, faint but intentional, forming a word. Run. Clara's blood ran cold, Tom's handwriting, etched in desperation. The discovery of the carved word shifted the team's mood from uneasy to grim. Landry radioed for backup, but the signal crackled, swallowed by the swamp's interference. Claire, checking the boats, found their fuel lines clogged with silt, though they'd been clear that morning. Remy, now openly fearful, muttered about the bayou closing in, his hands trembling as he sharpened his knife. Clara, undeterred, insisted they stay, her eyes fixed on the tree as if it could speak. That night, the hum grew louder, a vibration that rattled their camp and set their teeth on edge. Marcus, unable to sleep, kept watch, his dive light sweeping the water, catching glimpses of shapes that darted away. Around midnight, Claire screamed, pointing to the reeds where a shadow, tall, thin, impossibly still, stood watching. It vanished when Landry swung his flashlight, but the team was rattled, their nerves frayed by the swamp's relentless pressure. Clara, clutching the journal, read the final entry aloud. Day 5. He's here. Ethan's gone quiet. The tree's the key, but I don't know how. If anyone finds this, don't follow us. The words hung in the air, a warning and a plea. Clara, tears streaming, looked at the tree and swore she saw its branches move, not with the wind but with purpose. As dawn broke, she made a decision. They'd dig beneath the tree, where the roots twisted into the earth like veins. The bayou, silent and watchful, seemed to lean closer, ready to reveal, or claim, its next secret. The twisted cypress loomed over Clara Hargrove and her team, its roots sprawling into the muddy earth like the fingers of some ancient, buried giant. Dawn's gray light barely pierced the fog that clung to the slough, and the air buzzed with that unnatural hum, now a constant pressure in their skulls. Clara, her face gaunt but resolute, knelt beside the tree, her hands clawing at the soil where the roots plunged deep. The word run, carved into the bark, burned in her mind, Tom's desperate plea, but she couldn't turn back, not when she was this close to the truth about her husband and son. Marcus Tate, his diver's gloves streaked with mud, joined her with a shovel, his usual pragmatism fraying under the swamp's relentless weight. Sheriff Landry, his jaw tight, organized Deputy Claire and Remy to secure the camp, though their boats rocked uneasily in the current, as if the bayou itself was restless. The team had decided to dig beneath the tree, spurred by Clara's conviction that it held answers to the journal's cryptic warnings, the photograph's eerie backdrop, and the relics that kept surfacing like taunts. The swamp, however, seemed to resist, its air growing thicker, its silence sharper, as if warning them to stop. Clara didn't care. She dug, her nails splitting, her breath ragged, driven by the image of Ethan's toy duck and Tom's knife, proof they'd been here, in this cursed patch of L'Ombre du Bayou. The excavation was grueling, the soil heavy with water and tangled with roots that seemed to twist away from their shovels. Marcus, used to the bayou's depths, remarked that the ground felt wrong, too alive, pulsing faintly underfoot. After hours of digging, they hit something hard, not stone but metal, buried shallowly beneath a root. Clara's heart leapt as Marcus cleared the dirt, revealing a rusted ammo box, its lock broken but sealed tight by corrosion. Landry pried it open, revealing a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a second journal, smaller, its pages brittle but intact, and a handful of Polaroids, Ethan's handwriting on the back of each, childish and uneven. The photos showed the same twisted cypress, but from different angles, and in one, a shadow stood in the reeds, too tall, too thin to be human. Clara's hand shook as she read the journal's first entry, written in Ethan's scrawl. Dad says it's just the swamp, but I saw him again. He's not a man. He knows my name. The words mirrored Tom's journal, but Ethan's fear was raw, unfiltered, a child's terror at something he couldn't name. Clara clutched the journal to her chest, tears mixing with the mud on her face, as the team stared at the photos, the shadow in the reeds chilling them into silence. Remy, his voice low, whispered, "Le Failure. He's real." Even Landry, a man of facts, couldn't dismiss the unease that settled over them like the fog. The dig continued, driven by Clara's insistence, but the swamp fought back. Roots seemed to shift, closing over the hole they'd dug, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the shovels. Claire, checking the boats, found their radios dead, their compasses spinning wildly, just as Tom had described. Marcus dove into the channel again, searching for more clues, but surfaced gasping, his eyes wide with panic. He'd seen something, a shape, massive and fluid, moving beneath the water. Not an alligator or fish, but something that seemed to watch him back. He refused to dive again that day, his hands trembling as he described a current that tried to drag him into a crevice he hadn't noticed before. Clara, undeterred, kept digging, her fingers brushing against a root that felt unnaturally warm, almost fleshy. She uncovered a small leather pouch, its contents spilling into the mud, a handful of duck feathers, a child's whistle, and a brass key etched with the initials TH, Tom's. The key baffled her. It didn't match their house or a truck, but its weight felt significant, a piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. The team bagged the find, but Remy, now openly agitated, insisted they leave, his eyes darting to the reeds where the shadow had appeared in Ethan's photo. "This ain't a place for the living," he said, his voice cracking. Clara ignored him, her focus on the journals, which she read aloud by the campfire, piecing together a timeline of terror. Tom's journal described a storm that trapped them here, their boat caught in roots that seemed to tighten like a snare. Ethan's journal added details Tom omitted. The boy heard whispers in the fog, not words but his name, spoken in a voice that wasn't human. He wrote of lights, green, flickering, like fireflies but larger, dancing around the tree at night. Clara, cross-referencing the entries, realized they'd been here for days, maybe weeks, unable to escape. Tom's final entry mentioned a door in the tree, a hollow he swore wasn't there before, but Ethan's journal was more specific. Dad found a key. He says it opens something, but the man in the reeds doesn't want us to. Clara's breath caught at the mention of the key, now in Landry's evidence bag. She demanded they search the tree for a hollow, a lock, anything. Marcus, reluctant but loyal, climbed the cypress, his flashlight probing its crevices. He found a knot in the trunk, unnaturally smooth, with a slot that matched the key's shape. Clara's heart raced as she handed it to him, but before he could try it, the hum surged, a deafening pulse that knocked Claire to her knees. The water around their boats churned, waves slapping without wind, and the reeds rustled, parting to reveal that same shadow, tall, thin, its eyes glowing like marsh gas. Landry fired his pistol into the fog, the sound swallowed instantly, and the shadow vanished. The team froze, their breaths shallow, as the swamp seemed to tighten around them. Laura Hargrove's scream echoed in the root-bound chamber beneath the twisted cypress, and the hum swallowed by the pulsing hum low and to emanate from like the heart of the bayou in a language none of them knew. Globe bathing the underground dome, clutching both unnatural shadows, refused to leave the roots above her ride, the key was her last chance. She clutched Tom's journal, shaken but driven by her resolve, and the brass key in the knot, her hands trembling as the whisper, turning with a click lingered in the echoed unnaturally by a presence she couldn't see but felt, a crack splitting its bark, inescapable, revealing a hollow just wide enough for a person to crawl bearing Tom's shotgun. Clara moved to enter, Ethan's backpack, but Marcus grabbed her carved word "stay," his eyes pleading, was both a shrine, we don't know what's in there, and a warning. She shook Clara's heart pounded, fierce, torn between fear and the desperate hope that anyone could stop her. To Lombra du Bayou, the journals patched where her husband and son had vanished. The hollow was impossibly above, Marcus Tate, slick and Sheriff Landry, smelling Deputy of earth, Claire, and Remy shouted her name. She emerged in a chamber beneath the tree, swamp itself, its roots forming a dome lit, the shadow eerie green glow. Tall and thin with glowing eyes, a slab of stone didn't reappear. Lay Tom's shotgun. Its presence lingered. Ethan's backpack, a pressure in her chest that urged her to the floor. Yet Clara's scream echoed years of grief as the relics that tethered her to Tom and Ethan, and the team above shouted her name back. She knelt by the slab as the bayou sealed tracing the word stay. The shadow loomed behind their names. Its whisper the bayou would give them up. Clara. The chamber trembled. The swamp had claimed her. The hum rising to a deafening roar. But she held the key. Clara knew she was at the edge. A flicker of hope that the tree's secret would lead her to Tom guarded for centuries. She opened Ethan's journal, its childish scrawl a knife to her heart. His final entry, smudged but legible, read, "Dad tried the key. The tree opened, but the man in the reeds followed us. He says we can't leave. I'm scared, Mom." Clara's tears fell onto the page, blurring Ethan's words. Tom's journal, more methodical, described the hollow in the tree, how the key had unlocked it, revealing a passage to somewhere else. He wrote of lights, green and flickering, and a voice that knew their fears, urging them to stay. Clara, clutching the key, realized it was more than a tool. It was a tether, a bridge between the world above and whatever lay beneath. She searched the chamber for another lock, her flashlight catching glints of metal embedded in the roots. One root, thicker than the rest, bore a slot like the one Marcus had found in the tree's trunk. Her hands shook as she inserted the key, turning it with a click that reverberated like a heartbeat. The roots parted, revealing a tunnel, its walls slick and pulsing, leading deeper into the earth. Clara hesitated, the team's shouts above growing fainter, but Ethan's backpack, its straps worn from his small shoulders, gave her courage. She crawled into the tunnel, the air growing colder, the hum now a chorus of whispers, her name woven into their cadence. The bayou wasn't just alive, it was awake, and it knew her. Above, Marcus and the team scrambled to follow, their shovels clawing at the tree's roots to widen the hollow. Landry's radio was useless, its static drowned by the swamp's interference, and Claire's flashlight flickered, as if the batteries were drained by the air itself. Remy, his fear now a fever, refused to touch the tree, muttering about Le Valier, the Watcher, who claimed souls for the bayou. Marcus, driven by guilt for letting Clara go alone, dove into the hollow, his diver's instincts useless in the claustrophobic dark. He found the chamber, empty but for the slab, and followed Clara's trail into the tunnel, shouting her name. The passage twisted, its walls narrowing, and Marcus felt the same current he'd sensed in the water, a force that tugged at him, not physical but mental, whispering doubts and fears. He emerged in a second chamber, larger, its ceiling a tangle of roots glowing with that same green light. Clara stood in the center, staring at a stone archway carved with symbols no one could read, its frame pulsing like a living thing. Beyond it was darkness, but not empty. Shapes moved, shadows that weren't shadows, and Clara's face was a mix of terror and resolve. She turned to Marcus, her voice steady. "They're here. I can feel them." Before he could stop her, she stepped toward the archway, the key glowing faintly in her hand. The archway was no ordinary door. Its edges shimmered, the air rippling like water, and the whispers grew into a cacophony, names and pleas blending into a single, urgent call. Clara, clutching the journals, felt Tom and Ethan's presence, as if their voices were woven into the sound. She saw flashes, memories not her own, Tom shielding Ethan from the storm, their boat crushed by unseen hands, the man in the reeds, watching as they entered the tree. The key burned in her palm, and she understood. It wasn't just a lock's mate but an anchor, binding them to this place. She pressed it against the archway's center, where a slot glowed faintly, and the chamber shook, roots cracking, the green light flaring. Marcus grabbed her, shouting to wait, but Clara was beyond reason, her love for her family stronger than the bayou's pull. The archway opened, not to another chamber, but to a void, a place where light bent and time frayed. Clara stepped through, Marcus lunging after her, and the team above felt the ground quake, the tree shuddering as if in pain. Landry and Claire, now in the first chamber, found only the slab, the word stay now joined by come. Remy, sobbing, fled to the boats, swearing the swamp had taken them all. Clara emerged in a place that wasn't the bayou, yet was. The air was still, the ground soft, and the cypress trees stretched endlessly, their roots forming a labyrinth lit by green fireflies. Tom and Ethan stood before her, unchanged, their faces frozen in the moment they'd vanished. Tom's eyes, tired but fierce, met hers, and Ethan ran to her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "You found us," he whispered, but his voice was strange, layered, as if spoken by many. Tom's hand, warm but trembling, gripped hers, and he explained. The bayou was a threshold, a place where the world thinned, guarded by Levallier, an entity older than the swamp itself. The key had trapped them here, in a space between, where time didn't flow but looped, their lives bound to the tree. Clara, sobbing, held them, but the void shifted, Levallier's shadow looming, its eyes burning. "You can stay," it whispered, "or none leave." Clara, clutching the key, realized the truth. The bayou didn't just take, it bargained. She turned to Marcus, who had followed, his face pale but resolute. Together, they pressed the key into the archway's slot again, offering it back. The void roared, the shadows screamed, and the chamber collapsed, roots crumbling as light flooded in. Clara, Tom, Ethan, and Marcus awoke on the bank, the twisted cypress split in two, the key gone. The swamp was silent, its hum stilled, and Thibodeau welcomed them home, though none could explain where they'd been. Clara, holding her family, knew the bayou had let them go, but at night, she still heard whispers, faint, calling her back.